Today I'm going to be looking at just obviously covering part two, which is preparing for change. Um, what we're covering is the decisional balance, and of course I'll explain what that is, high-risk situations, looking at a change state or preparing for change, discussing withdrawal a little bit, and planning the coming week for that client, and then summarising and perhaps just covering some homework. So as you well know, this is called Quitting Cannabis, 1 to 6 sessions, and as Dion just said, it's predominantly for treatment seekers. And it can range anywhere between 3 sessions with your client to 6, 10, however long it takes for you to go through all the necessary components. Very much depends on their level of readiness. So again, I just want to highlight that the sections and the sessions are entirely, in terms of time, are entirely up to you and the client. Okay, remember Tony? Tony tested positive for cannabis because he had a car accident, as well as having difficulty coming into work. And I'm just going through this again for some of the people who have just joined us and are not quite on top of who we're talking about. So Tony is the case that we're using to just demonstrate the intervention. So he had a few problems at work as well with his boss, and Tony rang Nick Pick helpline, and they suggested that he come and see you. He called and made an appointment. He was assessed by you, and you identified that there was problematic cannabis use, obviously. Now, I just want to make you aware that we have 3 other different interventions that we provide people. The first one is a very brief intervention that takes approximately 30 minutes. We call it SAFE because it stands for Screening, Assessing, Feedback and Educating. And this is really a kind of intervention that is opportunistic. When someone comes in to see somebody and you just have this discussion, there is no focus on treatment because we know that just doing this actually affects change. So that's one of the things that we provide, and then the other one is the ACCU that we also have in our webinar series. You can log on and listen to that through our website. And then the third intervention is the more comprehensive one, which is the Quitting Cannabis that we're looking at today. So remember, you have 3 choices depending on where a person's at in terms of their readiness to change. So as I said, Tony started at the age of 15. In terms of frequency and duration, by the time he was 20, he was smoking every day. So he's been smoking every day over the past 10 years. In terms of quantity, he switched to joints when he got married about 5 years ago and smokes more on a weekend. Oops, what happened to that? Why is that there? Anyone? Yes, he smokes 2 to 3 cones a day and more on weekends. So that's basically the quantity. Now, the pattern of use is he smokes a joint when he gets home, which is equivalent to 3 cones. And I'm not sure whether I mentioned it last week, but I will repeat it again. Just to get your head around, smoking and the smoke that a person inhales, 1 joint is equivalent to smoking 3 cones, which is equivalent to smoking 5 cigarettes in terms of 3 times more tar and 5 times more carbon monoxide. So that is something to keep in mind whenever you're talking to a client at any stage in order to kind of educate them about smoke that they're actually inhaling. Okay, getting back to Tony. 1 joint when he gets home and 1 before he goes to bed. Sometimes he has 1 in the morning when he wakes up, depending on how he's feeling. So he averages out during the week anywhere between 6 to 9 cones. And on a weekend, he will smoke a little bit more, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So, throughout a week, he'll smoke anywhere between 15 and 21 per week. However, that doesn't exclude the times where he goes and, blows himself out with some friends, on a Saturday night or a Friday or whatever, and might smoke a bit more. So what we do, or what you've done is, or we have offered, Tony, quitting cannabis 1 to 6 sessions. We made a further appointment, and what we did with him, which was last week, and what you did with him last week and what we covered in our webinar was we introduced the booklet that he needs to take home and love and read and, ponder over. Stress the fact that homework does need to be done, that it is a collaborative intervention. And so this is something that's negotiated every step of the way. You explained what CBT was and how it works, and you discussed dependence so that he had a really clear idea of what dependence is, if he doesn't already. You said to him, look, you need to think about a change date, and that was negotiated to be 10 days from last week. And you administered the SDS, which is Severity of Dependence Scale, the CPQ, which is the Problems Questionnaire, and the HRC, which is looking at high risk confidence, like the situation that where you would absolutely give in, that you'd find it really hard to resist. Now, I know that all of you were sent a copy of those filled out as though, you were dealing with him. And then you gave Tony the feedback score on his SDS. So we covered that all last week. Now remember, there is a difference between the sections and the sessions, and you go through them at a different rate depending on your client and their success from week to week. So now we're preparing for change. You may have done what I've just talked about now, say in 20 minutes, and then continue on in the same session with preparing for change. So, the first thing you need to do is to check to see if he's read the booklet, or at least flick through it and filled out a few things as discussed last week. Now, you also need to check in every time you see a client on their level of motivation, because, as well that motivation fluctuates. It can fluctuate within hours, never mind day to day and week to week. So you always need to check in, if they're still wanting to do this and how much they're wanting to do this. So if they're still willing to continue. So check to see how he's gone with cutting down over the last 6 or 7 days, or, the last week since you saw him last time. So you'll review the past week. For example, with Tony, he committed to cutting down by a third. So you might say something like, so on day 1, 2, and 3, you cut down your cannabis by a third before you got home and before you went to bed, and you replaced it with a little bit more tobacco. And then day 4, 5, and 6, day 4, 5, 6, and 7, you cut down your cannabis by another third when you got home and before you went to bed in the evening, and you replace that with a little bit more tobacco. How did you go with this, Tony? And find out how he went. Maybe you might think about some patches, or just making some suggestions depending on how he went. But, for argument's sake and for the sake of simplicity, we'll just assume that, Tony was doing okay with this regime of cutting down. So you might want to point out that the toughest days are coming up when he stops altogether, which will be in 3 or 4 days. So next is you now needing to move through preparing for change. So you will tell him what you're going to be covered. So this is a rough idea of what you'll cover in that section. And what I've got here in relation to time, these are approximate times that you might spend on each of these kind of sections. Now, I'm told that I can get my little red dot down here. There we go. There's my little red dot. So yes, it says approximately 15 plus minutes, 15 plus minutes, 5 plus minutes. So again, it's really up to you and how much talking there is and how much stuff you have to go over. But basically, you will be telling him that, the steps towards change will include the decisional balance, This is what we'll be covering today, Tony. We're going to look at high-risk situations. We're going to prepare you a little bit for your change date, which is coming up on Friday. We're going to talk about withdrawal, which is section 4 of your book, and we'll plan the coming week for you so that you can make it as easy as you can. And then we talk about a little bit of homework, and I'll just go over the session. So that's basically how you would preface it, I guess. All right, so we start with the decisional balance. I mean, this is the pros and the cons of smoking and the pros and the cons of changing. So you might, start by saying that let's start thinking about change and the steps that might be involved in changing cannabis use, starting with why you smoke and why you really feel like you need to, cut down or, in this case, quit. And this is commonly referred to as the decisional balance. So what you're doing is you're weighing up the good things and the not so good things. And you will conduct the decisional balance. And the other thing that you'll do on top of that, which I'll get to in a minute, is rating. So you will start by saying, Tony, let's begin by discussing why you smoke and work through this. So write down for me a list of, and I would start with the not so good things about smoking. Or, I mean, it's entirely up to you whether you want to start with the good things about smoking, the not so good things about smoking. But I would, because people will remember usually the first and the last thing, so I would start with, what's the downside of you smoking? Let's write that down. And what are some of the things that you enjoy about smoking and why you do that? And write those down. So, as I said, you can do it in whichever order you like, but as I said, people will normally remember the first thing and the last thing that you might say. Now, this is how, after you've filled out this page, or he's filled out this page, and you've worked through the rating system, this is how it should look. So the decisional balance should look like this. And you might say something like, okay, you wrote down that money, cough, your memory, and work was a negative or a downside of your smoking. So let's start with money. On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this money issue or not having enough money for you, or having money worries for you? How important is that for you on a scale of 1 to 10? And then you would continue with the others and get him to rate them in the same way. Then you might want to add it up, and it should look like this. So, these are the reasons that he smokes. It's relaxing, it's fun, it feels good, and this is what he would rate them, and it adds up to 21. And the downside is money is a big factor for him. His cough, well, it's annoying, but it rates a 6. Memory, well, that's a really important thing for him. And work, obviously, he wants to do well and continue in his job and so on. So what you might say in the situation, or what I might say, it looks as though, you can see some of the downsides to smoking because you rated them, or I added it up, and it added up to 33, even though there are reasons, obviously, that you smoke, because that added up to 21. So that's one way in which I might, describe it. What I want you to note at this point is if the score is not high or the same as the pros, or if it's equal, you then need to go back to the problems questionnaire and flesh out the problems a bit more. For example, you might say, look, you said on this questionnaire, blah, blah, blah. Can you tell me a bit more about this? Because if a person scores the same for pros and cons, it suggests that they're ambivalent. So you really, before you proceed, you really want a person to be committed to change. So you need to kind of stop there and, talk in a way that you then begin to hear some change talk with them. that they're then committed and moving on that continuum to change, as opposed to still maintaining that ambivalence. So it's really very helpful when you do this rating. You get a really clearer picture. So we've looked at the pros and cons of smoking, and then you will go on to the pros and cons of change. So you're exploring their motivation to change, and in Tony's case, there appears to be an insight into the benefits of change. For example, 10 versus 44. And I might reflect that by saying, look, Tony, it appears that there's a great deal of benefit for you towards changing your cannabis use. As I've added that up, and that comes to a 44 versus you're being, not having too many costs related to your changing, which you might miss it a bit. You might get lonely, which we can attend to or talk about, and you think that you might get bored, and that adds up to about 10, you've said. So, does that sound about right? Again, you want to just check with them to see that you're on the right page, and make sure that they're still committed and that they understand, what this is all about. So you might, just summarise by saying, look, so I take it that you're still keen and committed to giving up, and you, out there in listener land, would, summarise that in your best kind of MI talk, just reassuring your client and so on. So when you do the rating, when you rate it in this way, the pros and the cons, what you're trying to do is listen to some change talk, but it also gives you 2 pieces of information when you do the rating scale. The first thing it does is it assesses their level of motivation, as I said, whether they're ambivalent or whether they're still keen. And it also identifies for you what is important to them. For example, what's important to Tony is the negatives of smoking, why he wants to leave that behind, and the reasons for change, right? So the reasons for change and what they are, what is he working towards? So that's important for you to identify, because you will then work with them to try and obtain or focus on the reasons they want to change, and constantly reaffirm why they're giving it up and what the negatives are to it. Now, when it comes to what are the good things about smoking, it's very important to validate those, because you need to replace those with other things. Obviously, we all need to find time to relax. We all need to have fun. We all need to do things that feel good. And for Tony, he uses cannabis to do that. So what we're going to have to do is suggest other things where he can achieve the same ends, but without a downside. So we also know, for Tony, what those perceived benefits are, and so we reassure him, that he will find ways to relax and have fun and so on. And it also gives us a chance to address the faulty thinking. It gives us a chance to challenge that faulty thinking where he thinks he's never going to be able to relax or he's never going to have fun without cannabis. So that's an opportunity to challenge those notions. And then we review the reasons for quitting, as I said, and we expand and reinforce the reasons for quitting, which is having more money and having a clearer head and what the benefits of those are. So just to summarise, if you really want to focus, and this is the new thinking behind MI now, if you've gone to Bill Miller's motivational interviewing workshops lately, you'll see that now, instead of doing the pros and the cons of smoking and the pros and the cons of quitting, he now says that we should only focus on the negatives of smoking and the positives of change. Now again, we don't want to be directive on this. You do whatever you feel comfortable with. I don't think it's detrimental in any way. But he says that it's, according to him, more beneficial to focus just on the negatives of smoking without reminding people of the reasons or the good things about smoking, and then obviously focus on why change. But again, it's entirely up to you and how comfortable you feel. So, as I said, you might summarise by focusing on the negatives, lack of money, memory impairment, terrible cough, and then again focus on the positives, which is saving more money for a great family holiday, thinking more clearly, advancing your job prospects, and so on. So, after the decisional balance is agreed upon, you then move on to the next bit, the next very meaty component of your session, which is the high-risk confidence scale, which is all about why, where, and when a person smokes, and you discuss internal and external triggers. And obviously the internal ones are the emotional ones and the external are the environmental. And you need to describe what those are. So using the confidence scale that was filled out last week, or if it wasn't filled out last week, it may have been filled out for homework, or he may fill it out right then and there in front of you and so on. You can do it during the session, whatever works. You'll explain why it's been filled out and what you're doing with this, and you'll explain the difference between internal and external. You know, why it's easier to control external than it is to control internal. And we'll sort of discuss this in a little bit more detail in a second. And you use a high-risk questionnaire to help discussion if you need to. So the relevant pages, and while I'm on it, you might identify one or two internal triggers that you're going to work on, and one or two external triggers that you might want to work on. Whatever is comfortable for you and obviously for them. So the relevant page looks like this. It's page 10, and he needs to write down in the booklet, either again during the session or for homework, and use the questionnaire that he filled out to prompt and promote discussion. So as we've already said, the HRC that you will send looks like this, and these are the things that he circled. And as you can see, there's no way that he'd be able to resist smoking at a party with friends where people were smoking, or arriving home wanting to relax. Zero chance that he could resist. So these are the things that you might want to target, for example, and so on. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a cute little video or cartoon that we put together. It's simply an example of what you might say when you're talking about the high-risk confidence scale. Again, you choose your own words, but this is just something we put together just to break up the monotony of listening to my voice for 60 minutes. Okay, cue the video, please.
A lot of the time you end up smoking out of habit. You end up smoking without really having a plan ahead or to put in any effort. Last week we went through the high-risk confidence questionnaire, and you identified some situations where you feel as though you have no ability of resisting a smoke, or they would always trigger you to smoke.
Yeah, there's a few of those.
Okay, it's really important that we plan and develop strategies to stop you from smoking in these high-risk situations.
Mm-hmm.
Here is the questionnaire that you filled out. Now, which of these do you think is going to be the biggest problem while you are trying to cut down?
Definitely arriving home and wanting to relax, because it's going to happen every single night.
Okay, there are a number of strategies that we can use here. The best thing to do is to avoid the high-risk situation altogether in, say, the first 2 weeks. However, given that you will need to come home, we will need to use other strategies. How do you think you can break the pattern of coming straight home from work and smoking?
I was thinking maybe I could do things after work, like do other things.
So kind of distracting yourself? So what would you do?
I've wanted to go to my parents a few nights a week. That'd be a good distraction, and I wouldn't have to worry about cooking dinner. And yeah, I just guess catching up with mates, because I've been isolating myself quite a bit lately.
Yeah, that sounds good. But what happens when you want to come home? You're in your home setting and you want to smoke.
I don't know, I guess I'll need some sort of plan, make a list of things to do when I get home, and just knock them off.
To distract yourself. Yeah, that sounds like a good start.
Okay, don't you just love how the notes just disappear off her lap and how all of a sudden the glass of water appears in her hand? We're pretty good like that. Um, so, getting back to the high-risk confidence scale, it is important to highlight the difference between internal and external. And it is easier to control external because you can avoid certain things if you choose to. Whereas internal, you're always going to feel something. You're always going to feel, for the rest of your life, someone's going to stress you out or you're going to get angry or whatever. So there are things that need to be done in order to control those internal triggers. As I said, we will always experience emotions. So once you've explained the difference between internal, which is anger, stress, sadness, worry, and external, such as being at a party with friends, seeing someone else smoke, walking into the house, or even seeing someone, have some weed or a bong. As I said, you need to choose, as many as they feel comfortable with, obviously one at a time, in order to develop some strategies. So it's critical to know what they are, as you will definitely have to develop different responses or teach Tony to develop different responses to those triggers. So now we need to help Tony identify them. So what you might want to do, because sometimes there are things that aren't obvious, that aren't written on that high-risk confidence scale. So just point out at this point where he can monitor his intake in his book, which I'll go into in more detail in a minute, but you just might want to highlight the monitor sheet at this point, which you will discuss for homework later in the session. But at this particular point, you want to confirm a change date or a quit date, as it is in Tony's case, because he wants to quit, which leads to the discussion around withdrawal. Now, he's chosen, and you're confirming with him that he's still wanting to quit by Friday of this coming week, which just happens to be, 26th of June. Not this coming Friday, next Friday. So at this point, you will want to talk about withdrawal and just check with him that he understands what that is. Point out the monitor sheet, which is on page 22, 23, and we'll get to this in a minute as well, and that he needs to fill that out. So you need to perhaps discuss withdrawal symptoms with him, suggest that he needs to make time for this process over the coming week, and we'll get to this as well in preparing for the week. Raise the notion of the 4 Ds as strategies, which, are written in the book, and he does need to read this for homework, which help him cope better with withdrawals. And I will discuss the 4 Ds in more detail next week. And, you may want to have a discussion around medication, which may alleviate withdrawal. Depends on where you work, depends on whether you're a doctor, it depends on what the symptoms are. Look at our fact sheets for further information about withdrawal and, what we suggest. But really, you review withdrawal with him because it's one of the things that, very often leads to relapse, a very uncomfortable withdrawal. And people have experienced this in the past and they're really quite fearful of it. So you need to allay his fears about that. Just, define what it is. This is a definition of what in the trade define as withdrawal. And the most common ones are sleep disturbance. So you just need to check through with him, if that's the worst thing that can ever happen, that he has a couple of nights where he doesn't sleep well. Again, very important that you allay his fears and try to develop some coping strategies to deal with the withdrawal. I guess in Tony's case, he doesn't smoke all that much, or certainly not as much as in my experience. I mean, there are some people who smoke 30 a day and will, experience extreme withdrawals. And so they might take longer to taper off. But go through the withdrawal symptoms and highlight that the most common ones, and he probably knows already, is sleep disturbance, irritability, a bit of nervousness. Now, what I also want to highlight at this point is the connection between tobacco and cannabis, and, how much does he smoke over and above mulling up with tobacco, and does he need patches and so on, and teach people about the relationship between nicotine and cannabis, how one kind of feeds the other, and why perhaps the withdrawal may be a little more difficult, because it may well be that, that they're experiencing withdrawal due to nicotine rather than cannabis. So that really needs to be fleshed out and reassured and find ways around this depending on, how much they mull up and so on. So I won't go on too much about that. It's just something that I think should be discussed and highlighted. Just outline the symptoms, give assurances, and discuss the relationship between nicotine and cannabis in relation to withdrawal. Okay, he needs to read page 21 of his book, so encourage Tony to read that section for homework. Show him the monitor sheet that looks like that, and stress how beneficial it is for him to fill it out during the withdrawal stage. And I have to tell you that I was involved in the delivery of the original randomised control trial on which this is based. And people would come in with their withdrawal sheets and show me how it had actually, those symptoms had subsided over the coming, week or 10 days. And so that they felt very heartened when that happened. And they would come very happily and very proudly, oh yeah, it really did. Look, this is how I felt on this day, and this is how I felt on that day, and it went down, and so on. So that's just my own experience. Of those who actually did withdraw over the week or two that we discussed, other people just, didn't choose a quit date and so on. Anyway, I digress. Please cue to the video now on the monitor sheet and withdrawal. Thank you.
Now, what I would like to discuss with you is withdrawal. A very important component of successfully quitting cannabis is dealing with withdrawal, which is what you will be going through this coming week, and we need to make this as easy as possible for you.
That'd be great, because it's been so hard all the other times I've tried to quit.
Yeah. What I would like you to do is use this monitoring sheet from your first quit day. Here it is on page 2. We have already gone through various symptoms of withdrawal. What I want to do is use this monitor. I want you to use this to monitor your withdrawal symptoms. Go through the checklist and tick each symptom in terms of whether they are mild, moderate, or severe each day.
Okay.
The point being, which is very often the case, that by the end of the week, you will be able to see that your ticks have shifted from severe or moderate to mild and so on.
They get better, is that what you mean?
Yeah. You will see them gradually move across the page.
No, that's encouraging.
Absolutely. Within 7 to 10 days, those symptoms diminish. If they don't after a couple of weeks, then we need to have another conversation about what's going on. So would it be okay for you to fill this withdrawal monitor sheet out during that week?
Yeah, that's easy. It'll be interesting to look at it this way.
Do you have any questions about withdrawal or the monitoring sheet?
Maybe just when the worst part will be.
Okay. Most people report that around day 4 is the worst they feel. So what we need to do is develop very specific strategies and decide which people will be there for you around that time so as to make it as tolerable as possible. So let's talk about what's going to happen each of those days for you. So what I mean is how you're going to spend that week. who are you going to be with, and so on. How does that sound?
Yeah, it sounds great. I feel like there's a plan and I'm not going to be doing this alone, so I'm not as stressed about it now.
Great. I'm pleased with that. So you will see that if you do plan it, it won't be as bad as you think.
Okay, I'm back. Have you noticed all the changes in the room? I was just thinking now as I was watching this that we should have a competition and give a prize to the people who notice the most amount of changes in the in our little cartoons. Anyway, so let's go back to something more serious. Move back to a discussion around strategies for the coming week, like delaying and distracting, decatastrophizing, de-stressing, and so on. I mean, basically, the other D is just to deal with it in whichever way that you have discussed with them. But again, they're all explained both in your guidelines and in the client's book. So, so this depends, again, on the client's quit date and how far in advance they've chosen to quit and how slowly they've decided to reduce, which is negotiated with you. So Tony will continue to reduce until his quit date, which is this Friday. But first, we kind of need to plan, some strategies. But before we do that, a very important thing that you need to address with a client is what are they going to do with their leftovers, right? You need to talk about them and decide what to do with whatever cannabis he's got left or the implements that he has or whatever reminds him of smoking. Now, everyone's different, and some people out of sight, out of mind, while other people say, no, I'm in control, I can look at it and I can say, you're not bigger than me, I'm controlling you, you're not controlling me, and you're going to sit there as a reminder. So this, again, has to be discussed. What is easier for that client? What's he going to do with all this stuff? Because you don't want it to be a trigger for relapse, okay? That's the most important thing. Alrighty, let's move on. So you need to talk about planning the week. You begin by discussing the ones that can be avoided, if at all possible, right? And then maybe ask, if you've tried in the past, has anything worked? And has anything not worked? Because you try to avoid something that you can, that triggers you wanting to smoke. And that's going to be a pretty lengthy discussion, with Tony. Meeting a particular friend, or just say, for argument's sake, that, people come around to his house and smoke from time to time. Well, that needs to be discussed, and how he's going to deal with that, and do his friends know that he's trying to quit, and how do they feel about that, and are they okay with not coming around and lighting up, and so on. And then, you need to create others, and you need to develop other strategies, depending on what it is. So make time for the process. Using a diary, any diary, or just get a sheet of paper and, just break it up in days or whatever. You need to plan the coming week, whether it's cutting down or quitting, as it is with Tony. One thing that you might want to kind of raise with him are some support systems. They act as a distraction. They act as some support. You might say, so tell me, are there people in your life that you can kind of count on who you can use as support systems? Can you give me a list of who those people might be? There's Paul, there's Joseph, there's Mandy, or whoever. And okay, so who's going to do what with you? What will you do with Paul, for example? Oh, he's a mad, I don't know, video freak, and we do this, that, and the other together. Okay, what about Joseph? What would you do with him? Oh, he's a mad sports freak, so maybe I could, when I'm feeling really like I'm busting, go out and kick a football with him or whatever. I mean, again, negotiated. But what he does need are people that he can count on, not just to whinge and whine and, oh, I'm feeling terrible, but, to distract him from the cravings and to do things that are relatively fun and easy. So you might want to just develop a support system for the coming week with him or ongoing for that matter. So what will you be doing together and what other things can you do to make this week easier? Because, for example, you'll go over what he decided. You decided that you were going to quit in 10 days from the time I saw you last week, and this is how the coming week is going to look. And as you can see, X is for cannabis and 0 is for tobacco. So he's going to mull up 1 to 2, 1 cannabis to 2 tobacco. And then on Friday, he's not going to have anything. You're going to go cold turkey. Now, do you think you're going to need some patches during this coming week, Tony? How have you been going with, the reduction so far? Again, you will check. So, Tony, the goal for the coming week was for you to cut down by 1 smoke a day, either the smoke when you get home or the one before you go to bed, and that by Friday there's going to be no more smoking. Are you okay with that? Because now we need to kind of plan some helpful strategies to replace smoking. So during this week and after this week, it's very, very important to develop the strategies that he feels more comfortable with. So let's just start with something just to keep mindful that he might want to think about. These are just some examples that you negotiate with the client. He's thinking about, what came up in a discussion was, he might put a big sign on the door that just reminds him. He might walk straight into the bathroom and have a shower after arriving home. He won't turn the TV on if normally he turns the TV on and that's just a trigger. He might turn the radio on or put some music on. He might start cooking dinner or something. There are so many things that a person can do to remind them about what they're trying to do, which is change that automatic response that has been going on for so long. Not dissimilar to people who smoke. Coffee and smoking goes together. One is a trigger, and so they need to kind of cut that down. So these are just some suggestions that might be put into place. And so using the diary, work through these strategies in relation to what might be implemented, either for the coming week or in relation to the high-risk situations that you identify, or both. So, for example, on Wednesday, Tony might stay back at work a little bit later and do whatever he thinks he needs to do, or he might catch up with whoever and see a movie or walk home, or he might go to the gym or go for a swim, and so on. I mean, these are just, as I said, some suggestions that are negotiated with whatever the client feels comfortable with. But they have to change their routine. They have to change the coming week and the coming 4 weeks until they've kicked that habit. They've weakened those triggers and have strengthened because they felt some positives after they've stopped smoking, and they've strengthened that commitment to change. Some other examples, might be Friday. Did I do Thursday? Yes, I think I did that. Friday, you'll use one of the other things that's written as a strategy, and choose people to do these things with. When you come home, for example, you might, if hot chocolate is, definitely no substitution with alcohol, preferably, if you don't mind. I don't know if they're into hot chocolate, maybe tea, whatever. A bath, any kind of relaxation, listening to music, talking to someone, getting on Facebook, whatever is not a trigger for smoking. So these need to be organised with you while they're in the session to be used in the following week. And you will check from week to week what's worked and what hasn't worked, and then just tweak that a little bit with some further suggestions. And this needs to be written in the diary. People who have smoked for a long time really do need to get some help in planning and organising. So, this is how, where you come in is like a coach, if that kind of makes sense. Okay, so you need to get ready, which is to fill in your book and get ready for homework. So high-risk situations, think about them as they're discussed on page 15, Tony. Write them down, read the section and fill in the blanks. All these strategies will also be used after you quit and you're experiencing a little bit of withdrawal. So before you go, Tony, can I just quickly discuss the monitor sheet with you and how to fill it out? But particularly, I want to talk to you about the mastery rating that is there at the end of that. So what you're going to do is you're going to go through and describe what each of those columns means, the date and the time, where are you, how strong was that desire out of 10 to smoke, what were you thinking, what were you feeling, what actually happened, what was the outcome, what were the consequences of that particular situation, how much did you smoke, and the mastery, how strongly you mastered that urge on a scale of 0 to 10. So you will now, again, get this fantastic little cartoon that we put together just to demonstrate discussing the mastery. Okay, cue to the mastery video.
Just before you go, Tony, can I quickly discuss the monitor sheets on page 29 and 30 and how you need to fill them out?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'm going to explain the various columns in a minute, but right now I just want to focus on the last column here that says mastery and explain the rating scale of 0 to 10.
Yeah.
Okay, this column where it says mastery relates to how confidently you overcame the desire to smoke in a particular situation. So what I mean by this is how well you overcame the urge to smoke in the particular situation that you've already described in this column.
Ah, that's a bit scary. You're scaring me now.
You will be fine. So that 0 means that you gave in straight away. Yes? You get that?
Yeah. I hope that doesn't happen.
And a 10 means the thought to smoke came into your head and you said to yourself, nope, no way, I am not going to do this, I am not going to give in, I am not going to smoke, and you don't. You find it quite easy to go and do something else and feel good about it.
Yeah, I get that. That'd be amazing.
Whereas a 5 might go something like this. I'd love to smoke. Should I? No, I shouldn't. But I really feel like one. What will I do? I said I wouldn't. And you're grappling with this. You're fighting with it. And you finally give in and end up smoking. But at least you gave it some thought before you gave in. Does this rating make sense?
Yeah, I get it. This column will be interesting. Is this after I've given up?
Not necessarily. It's specifically during our time together, so you get a practice in thinking things through and getting to know what elicits a craving to smoke and what you're thinking and what you're going to do to control the situation.
Oh, okay, great. Well, geez, it's a lot of work.
Yes, but anything worth doing, needs a bit of work. But it's not beyond your capacity. Or your capability. It depends on how much you want this change, and it sounds to me like you're really ready for it.
Yeah, you're right. I am sick of it. I really want to kick this habit.
Okie dokie. Just, I guess, remember that this is just a suggestion of what might be said as an explanation of the mastery. Okay, getting back to getting ready and doing homework. Again, strategies for high-risk situations for homework, as you can see on the slide. Ring around, decide what people are going to do what with you. and what you'll do with them, movies, dinner, etc. So for homework is, as it says on that slide, and then there's the monitor sheet on page 29 and 30 of their book. There's the withdrawal monitor sheets on pages 22 and 23. They need to read pages 11 and 12, and the one on withdrawal on page 21. So given time constraints, I can't go through the entire book, but hopefully you'll flick through it and see exactly what I'm talking about. So please read through it. It's pretty self-explanatory. Probably do this day in and day out. What you now need to really just reinforce is that change is a journey, and it's discussed on pages 11 and 12 in their book. And we need to prepare. They need to make an effort. They need to be adaptable. Just try stuff. If it doesn't work, then we'll try something else. So there is a certain amount of adaptability that is required. You need to set achievable goals, or at least help them set achievable goals, because what you don't want to do, and they shouldn't be thinking of doing, is setting themselves up for failure. So set achievable goals, again, negotiated in collaboration with them. And look at how to implement those key strategies that you develop with them, and perhaps develop new ones if the old ones don't work. So that's about what you would cover. And again, I will stress that it depends on you how quickly or how slowly you move through this. But the most important things that need to be discussed, because they actually make up the heart of the intervention. The decisional balance, the high-risk situations, and identifying what those are and developing strategies for those, and setting some goals for the coming week. So they are extremely important things to cover, whether it's in one session or 2 sessions or sometimes even 3 sessions. So decisional balance, high-risk confidence, and some strategies, looking at the change date, talking about withdrawal, planning the coming week, and summarising and setting some homework